Hi there, thanks so much for tuning in to today's Drawing for Adults class brought to you by the Ann Arbor District Library and the Ann Arbor Art Center. Today we are exploring part 2 of our perspective series, where each week we are exploring a different aspect of representing perspective. So here I have these different objects here that I have kind of going off into space. And so how I'm going to start this is just with some paint. So acrylic paint or pastels can be really fun. Depending on how you're doing this though, you might want to draw the objects first, and so you'll be able to see how I have kind of isolated the objects occasionally, and so you can always do those first. It just depends. If you're doing acrylic painting though, you can do this entire background first and then paint right on top of it with those shapes. So you don't really necessarily have to draw this kind of wormhole looking thing, but you can if you would like. But regardless, you can see here how I'm mapping out this sense of perspective, because I want these objects, these forms, these 3D forms to kind of be floating, sort of like they're getting sucked into this cool little wormhole. I had a hard time saying that word. And so you can draw different shapes, and then you can see how I'm putting those into perspective. So the same way to those 1-point perspectives with our last week's video, you can see I'm doing the same thing by making them all lead into that kind of white hole. And then so here now I've isolated my objects, and so I can shade them so that it will look similar, so that light that's kind of coming from that wormhole is reflecting into those objects, and especially like the part that's kind of going towards the wormhole versus the parts of the shapes that are more closest to me as the viewer down towards this bottom part of the paper. And so I'm shading these forms accordingly, of course, and making it quite colorful as well. You can see I'm using the colors complement. So if you're using paint or soft pastels, using the colors complement is a great tool to darken up, to add some shading into a certain color. So purple, for example, is what I'm using there in the yellow. So you can see how I'm doing that. Same with the red, with the green there. And so this just kind of allows me to be able to achieve the look of a 3D object into a 2D space on paper. And then here, digitally I have to kind of touch this up in a different way. But either way, you can see how those objects are convincing because of the scale. And so all of this is really helpful, seeing how I mapped it out to begin with by kind of drawing out that path. So making sure that those are really large at the beginning, and then they're getting smaller and shrinking as it gets closer and closer to that wormhole. And so to show that part again, here I am again, I'm making it so it's kind of curvy, those lines, but you can see I've got 3 sections, like 3 different paths that each of these kind of columns of forms are falling into. And so some of them stick out a little bit, but for the most part, then it's just the top of the object kind of goes to the top of that path, and the bottom of the object goes to the bottom of the path. And it is a little bit confusing, so take your time really looking at how I'm going about drawing this and how I'm cutting it off to make sure that how I'm connecting those lines, those points to that vanishing point, just like we did last week with our 1-point perspective project. So this is kind of 1-point perspective still, but with a bit of a twist. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you'll tune in next week as we explore atmospheric perspective.